Yeah. So then we move on to Nathan Maness versus Jonathan Munoz Jr. at 145 pounds. So Nathan Maness, his name is Joseph Nathan Maness. So you'll find him as a couple of different things. And it does make it a little bit harder to find some footage on him. The second time around, I was actually able to find a lot more footage than I was able to the first time.
I think a lot of people were researching him, so it kind of pulled a lot of stuff to the top.
It was a lot easier to find research this time than for the first video. But you know, we talked about him before. We're going to do it again real quick. He's an American. He's 11-1. He's 29 years old. He's 5 feet 10 inches tall. He's also making his UFC debut, but he did have this fight scheduled earlier, so he does have more time to be prepared for this fight. He's got 5 decision wins. He has 4 knockouts, and he has 2 submissions. He's also the former Bluegrass Brawls bantamweight champion. He's the former Warrior FC lightweight champion. He's the former TKO bantamweight champion and the former HRMMA featherweight champion. So he's fought as high as 155 pounds and won championships, and he's won championships down to 135 pounds and at 145. So he's going to be the bigger fighter, I feel like. Although, looking at the weigh-ins, he didn't look like he was honestly that much bigger. So then he's going against Johnny Munoz Jr., who's an American. He's 10-0. He's 27 years old. He's 5 feet 9 inches tall, and he's making his UFC debut. He has 6 submission wins. He's got 2 knockout wins, and he has 2 decision wins. Another interesting thing about him, all of his pro fights prior to this have been in King of the Cage.
Yep, his amateur fights were all King of the Cage as well.
Yeah, even his amateur fights. And he was the former 135-pound pro champion for King of the Cage at one point. He's been training jiu-jitsu his whole life. His dad was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, and he is now a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt himself. What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, so well, ultimately, I got to do it here. This is the Can Crusher alert. Can Crusher alert. You look at his record. Yes, he's been in King of the Cage for, 13 total fights. 3 of those were amateur, 10 pros, undefeated in all of them. But when you look at his record, man, he fought a lot of dudes with losing records at the time that they fought, or dudes that had only had a handful of fights at the time they fought. So this is my Can Crusher alert. For me, Johnny Munoz, you look at him, he is 10-0.
Yes.
Professionally. He's won all of his fights, including his amateur fights. But if you look at his records, the guys he's fought have not been very experienced either. Mm-hmm. Granted, when you first start out, you're 1-0, 0-0 starting out, I expect you to fight guys with similar records. But once you're 8-0, 9-0, 10-0, I feel like you should be fighting guys that are at least, with a winning record to the point, with, similar, 7-1 maybe, something 7-2 even.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I agree with that. You need to, but it's like we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
Just because you might be a can crusher or you fought a lot of cans
doesn't mean you don't have skills.
You don't have skills.
But
Johnny
and so
Munoz,
he does have the jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
We look at him. He trains out of Sequence Jiu-Jitsu in Norco, California. And, like we said, he is 10-0.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about him is, do you remember the guy for King of the Cage who was offered a short notice UFC fight, but the King of the Cage would not let him fight?
Yeah.
That's Johnny Munoz.
Yes, it is.
He was offered a short notice fight against Marlon Vera back in 2019.
Yep.
And King of the Cage would not release him from his contract, so that was kind of a shitty deal for him. Because, you're a regional promotion, essentially. You should be letting these guys get their shot.
Well,
they took a lot of heat for it, too.
Ultimately, that's what those smaller shows, let's be honest,
They're
King of the Cage
shows.
is a smaller show. It might have been around for a long time. And they use the fact that they've sent a lot of guys onto the UFC as a marketing tool. They literally do. They play the videos of guys like Uriah Faber and other guys that have fought in the UFC. They play their clips in the beginning of their pay-per-views. On the beginning of their fight cards, if you watch it, they always show those clips of those guys who have made it to the UFC. So they're very well aware of what their promotion is doing as far as feeding guys up. So it was kind of a garbage thing for King of the Cage to say, hey, we're going to keep you here, even though we know that your ultimate goal is to move beyond us.
Yeah.
Especially for a guy who's fought all of his fights there.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad deal, but he's getting his shot now, another late notice fight.
Yes.
So we're going to find out, but he's a pressure grappler, so he's kind of like, in a sense, I want to say, kind of Khabib-ish in the way that he's just going to come forward and try to grab you in a clinch and then get you down. That's just essentially what he's going to be looking to do.
He's been working on his hands. He's been trying to get his hands better, but ultimately I don't think that that's his best tool. I definitely think that's going to be his weakness against Nathan Maness.
Oh, absolutely.
Nathan Maness has good hands, though. You know, he's got good, powerful hands. He does a good job of moving backwards and striking. So what I think that, you know, Munoz Jr. is going to have to look out for is when he starts pressuring in, Maness will step back, fire that right.
Yep.
And I think that Munoz is going to have to watch out for that. Ultimately, I don't think that Munoz is going to be able to get him down to the ground. I think that Maness has shown that he's very skilled and he's very capable of staying on the feet, and he's very capable of landing some shots. I think it's a step up for competition for Johnny Munoz. I know Maness is making his debut in the UFC as well, but I feel like overall he's fought the higher caliber of fighters, and I'm going with Maness by decision.
Yeah, so for me, this could be kind of a trap fight for Maness too.
Yeah.
He likes to wrestle sometimes.
Sometimes.
And he'll shoot in and he'll get in the clinch and he'll take you down, and we've seen that. And I'm not saying that's bad for him because we've seen wrestlers dominate jiu-jitsu guys before. Yeah. But we've also seen wrestlers make some mistakes and get tapped out by those jiu-jitsu guys.
Oh, yeah.
So,
a lot of times.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could be his downfall. I think if Maness is smart, they just go with a game plan to defensive wrestle, keep this thing standing, and keep it on the feet. And if that happens, I've got Maness winning by knockout in round 2.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, so you got a knockout, I got a decision. We both have Maness.
Yep.
So on the new fights, we both have the same fighter picked again. But you know, ultimately with this fight with Maness and any of these really last minute fights, if they're anything within the last week or 2 weeks, it's really hard to get that game plan down in that amount of time.
Yeah.
So whatever they were working on is probably really what's going to stick out. Obviously, there's also that other saying that your game plan goes out the window once you get hit in the face.
That is true.
So